That was 77. We begin towards the bottom of 76B. We're at about 7 lines from the bottom. I'm Rav Papa. We're continuing to discuss the selling of osios, the kinyan of osios, the acquiring of osios, and osios are a document like an IOU. Literally means letters, but it's a document which contains an obligation to pay. Amar Papa, if you sell such an IOU to someone, you have to write on it. You should you are acquiring, if you're acquiring this piece of paper, this document together with all of its obligations. In other words, you're not just selling the piece of the physical the physical piece of paper. You're selling it as a document that contains embedded bits. Amar Rashi said, "I'm recently Shmata coming to Rav Kana. I told this to Rav Kana. Recently, he said to me, Tamad Kasalei." So, in other words, like the reason that you have to write that means that if you don't write it, then the debt obligation is not included in the sale. If you don't write it, then it's not, you don't acquire the debt in the IOU. But that doesn't make sense. Like, really, why are you buying this contract for, you're buying it to like seal up your jars? He said, yeah, that's why. Like indeed, the paper itself is a separate item from the obligation it contains. Amar Meimar says, Hilchasa Osios Niknos B'Msira Karabi. Going back to yesterday's discussion, how can you acquire an IOU? We rule like Rebbe that you can acquire it with Masira, right? Where you just take a handle, you grasp it. You don't even need to move it. And you don't need a contract to purchase the IOU. Rashi says, Gemara Osfara. How do you know? Is this like a received tradition that you got from your teachers, or is it logic that you determined that Rebbe's claim it makes more sense? Rebbe's position makes more sense. Amalei said, Gemara. I figured it out. Sorry, not I figured it out. Gemara, it's a tradition. I got it from my teachers. Amar Ravashi, Svaranamehu. You know what? Not only is it valid to accept Rebbe's position because that's what you were taught, but also it's a logical thing. Why? The osios mileninu, because IOUs is just like it's words, right? It's doesn't have it's an obligation. It's not a tangible thing. You can't take possession of words with words. You need something stronger. Below, Sigmar says, why not? But Rabba said, there's 2 ways of understanding a star, a contract. Zachu besada liplani. If the owner says, acquire this field for someone else, v'kisfulo sashar, and write him a contract for it, then choser b'shtar. Then he can retract his instructions about the shtar, but once they've actually like done some act to acquire the field, and that's done. You can't go back on it. But if he says almanas he says possess this field for someone along with or on condition that you also write a document about it, then choser ben b'shtar ben b'sada. Then he can change his mind until the document, the contract is signed by him. He can change his mind about the whole thing because he made the shtar a condition of the kinyan. Rabbi Chia said, Shlosha shtarts, and it was 3 situations to consider. Trey hadamaran. So you already listed 2. Idach, the third one is im kadam mocher v'kasav shtar. If then the seller went ahead and wrote the shtar, the document, keosa shashaninu, Like we've learned, like the way we learned to do it in the Mishnah, which said, "Kosin shtar lamocher afal pi she'ein lokeach imo." You can write the seller can write a shtar even though can write the contract even though the buyer is not there. So kevan shehechzik zeh b'karka, once the owner sells the field to the buyer and did a kinyan and did a chazaka, then nikna shtar b'chol makom shehu. Then then the shtar is already like the shtar that's already been written by the buyer is valid, no matter even if even if the buyer doesn't have it yet. So that's the third way that to understand how you can, the ways, the conditions under which land is transferred. Um,
And so, what does it mean that the star is only the star or the star with the land?
well, the land is where the land is. The land doesn't move. So I don't understand the question.
No, I mean if we say only the star is valid here, or here in Nikna star b'chol makom shehu, then
No matter if the buyer has the contract, even if the contract is still with the seller, but once it's been signed, then it's valid under these circumstances.
so the sale is valid, sale of the
Yeah,
land,
yeah, yeah. Right,
for
right.
example, and not
Exactly.
because before we were seemed to be that we were separating the star from either the land or from the words that are written in the star, right? So you could still, but the star should represent the item that's being sold, right?
Right. Yeah, so what we're saying is, yeah, the first case was where it's possible for the guy to say, um, well, it's possible for for him to change his mind about the star, and if it was a condition of sale, um, then he can change his mind. Then the Kinyan, the Chazaka had no effect because it was conditional on the star. That was one possible situation. So in other words, there is a case where you've done the Kinyan, but the Kinyan is the Chazaka, but the Chazaka is not effective because you explicitly made the Kinyan dependent on the completion of the star. Does that make sense?
So if there's no star, then there's no Kenyan, right? In that case.
And that's right. The Kinyan is not effective because the guy said it's a condition of sale. The Kinyan is not the sale is conditional on both Chazaka and Star. Is there no Star yet? Then there's no Kinyan yet. The Kinyan doesn't work yet.
And the Kenyan has to be accompanied by a star in that case, right?
Right.
Because we mentioned before, and this got a little confused. I had to think about that. I'm still not sure. It says mili b'mili lo mekanyan. So the words themselves would not be enough to make a Kenyan. That's what he's saying there. But there are cases where we say that words are would be a Kenyan, could be a Kenyan, maybe.
That case was dealing with how do you acquire an IOU, right? So an IOU isn't really a tangible thing. Like the paper is tangible, but the value of it is not in the paper. The value is in the obligation imposed by the contract, right? By the IOU, right? So when we say mile b'mile lo kanyan, that's referring to how do you acquire an IOU. So since it's intangible, you can't acquire it intangibly. There has to be something stronger. You have to actually pick it up.
In that case, that's a star, for example.
Yes.
Well, that it sort of applies here as well. I mean, we're saying here. I mean,
Well, yeah, but land is not melee, so that it doesn't apply.
But you could think of it that I know land is not melee, but in this case also that we're saying, according to this opinion, there must be a contract, a star with the land, or the land is not acquired.
Yeah, because the seller made it a condition. That's particular to that circumstance, right?
Oh,
It's not a principle that you have to that you have to have a star. It's because the seller said, I'm only selling this to you if there's a corresponding star.
So he could say, I'll sell it to you by words.
Yeah,
Good.
exactly. Well, land can't be acquired by words either. So
That's what I was getting. I mean,
yeah.
I was thinking from what you were saying that the specific instance that here he specified it must be a star. Then I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a situation where land could be acquired without a
Oh.
star also.
Hmm.
So maybe it is more general then.
Um, is there though? I think you really need for land you need a chazaka at least, or a star. Yeah, you could be called a star, but that's not Milay, is it?
Right. Well, no, but without a star, does the land require a star?
It requires some kind of chazaka. It could be occupying it or making a change to it, right? Like putting up a fence, um, or a star.
Oh, so it could be acquired without a star then.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Okay. Um, okay. Where are we? And we're going to support what we just said. The Chasim Shein Lehem Achrayus, the mission says if you have um, um, movable property, right? Property that's not subject to lien. Niknin im nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus can be acquired together with real property. How? Bekesef ushtar chazaka. So if you have a single deal that involves both land and metaltalin, then you can use then the metaltalin can be acquired along with the real property using kesef shtar chazaka. Um, so, um, so what do we see from that? That even though you haven't done anything to the metaltalin, the fact um, that the seller intends to include it in the sale is enough, right? So that's like mile, right? You haven't done any act to the metaltalin. You've only done an act to the land, right? And yet the fact that the seller just says it includes the furniture in the house, then that's sufficient that's melee, and that's sufficient to affect the transfer. So Gemara says Agav Shane. Um, no, you can't draw that conclusion. The fact that it's included with land changes the nature of the transaction. You can't tell me that just like movable property can be acquired as part of a real estate transaction, doesn't mean you can generalize and say that um, you can transfer movable property in general without doing anything to it, without any action. Okay. Daha, and I can prove that to you, Matbea. If you take a case of coins, you cannot acquire coins with a kinyan chalipin, right? V'agav ara nichne, and yet you can acquire money, coins, together with land, right? Through the kinyan of the land, the coins can be included. How do I know? Kihod Rav Papa Habaloi Tracer Alfe Zuze Bechazai. Rav Papa had 12,000 dinarim that someone was holding for him. Akninhu Niele Rav Shmuel Bar Acha Agavasifa Devese. And Rav Papa transferred the money to Rav Shmuel along with like the asipa, the threshold of his house, right? So, in other words, he wanted to transfer the money to someone else, so he did it as part of a real estate transaction because he didn't the coins weren't accessible to him at the time. He also, and so then Shmuel comes back with the money. Nafak la'apei ad tavach. He was so happy that he heard that Shmuel was coming with his money. It was a lot of money. It was 12,000 dinarim. He ran out to greet him all the way to this place called Tabach. So that indicates that's like just indicating that that you could the Kenyan there clearly was made through a Kenyan Chalipin because Shmuel was not at the land to acquire it. So so we know that money can't be possessed through chalipin, and yet if it's attached to a real estate transaction, it can be. This story proves that you can do a kinyan chalipin that includes the coins. Similarly with the document that we saw. And
But
the
he gave
last,
the money to Rav Shmuel. He transferred
right?
to Rav Shmuel, and Rav Shmuel Ben Acha came back with the money. Is that what happened?
Yeah, yeah. He was able to put take control of the money, and it was all I mean, then he was clearly going to give it to back
Rav Papa?
to Rav Papa. Yeah, Rav Papa as a gift or whatever, or maybe he sold him something, but basically Rav Papa was able to benefit from that money because Rav Shmuel was able to take it through this sale.
But
For some reason, Rav Papa couldn't go to where it was and pick it up himself. So he sent somebody else, but he had to give him, the legal title to it.
so he
Okay.
was just holding. I'm reading it one way. It basically gives this money away. So then transfers it. So now this person, Rav Shmuel, brings the money back to him. Is that what
Yeah,
happened?
yeah. Shmuel was, the way I read it, Shmuel was like a friendly party that was just going to give him the money back, right? But the difficulty was there was some question about whether they were going to be able to get their hands on the money from the guy who was holding it. So by doing this transaction and making Rav Shmuel the owner, Rav Shmuel was able to go and get the money. And now I presume he was going to give it back to Rav Papa as a gift or whatever.
How is it different from a shaliach? Person sends a shaliach, go get my money.
Yeah, that's true. But maybe that wouldn't have. The undertone is that there was some kind of risk here that the guy was not going to pony up, or was not going to. Maybe he was having a feud with Rav Papa or something. I don't know. But he was willing to give it back to the owner if the owner was somebody else. It's a little unclear. Like, yeah, you're right. Why didn't he just send Shmuel as a shaliach? Like, what did he have to do that for? Um, so, he could have documented that he's acting on my behalf. So maybe there was some kind of conflict. It's a little unclear, but the point of it is that he was able to do this kinyan of the money, even though the money wasn't at hand, by attaching it to a real estate transaction. Okay, and last point in the Mishnah was,
And he
uh,
transferred, and who?
yeah,
So the wait a minute, what was the real estate transaction? Who acquired what from whom?
Rav Papa sold him a little piece of his house. Sold Rav Shmuel the threshold of his house, right? So like an
Oh,
insignificant part of his house, but it's real estate. So therefore you could attach something else to him.
even though the money was off in Yenim land and the house
Exactly.
was right here.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. Okay. Just seems a little. I'm just
A little
trying to
convoluted,
conceptualize.
right?
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to conceptualize this, and
Yeah.
you could think of different scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah, but regardless of what the motivation was, the mechanism is clear.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay. If you sell a ship, the Mishnah said that doesn't include the slaves or the containers or the antiki, my antiki. So what is antiki? Amar Papa, Iska de Begava, the business, the merchandise in the ship. Okay, just a translation. Next Mishnah, Machar Sakaron, if you sell a wagon. Lo machar saparados, that doesn't include the donkeys that are pulling it. Machar saparados, if you sold the donkey, lo machar sakaran, doesn't include the wagon, even if they're attached to the wagon at the time. Machar samet, if you sell a yoke to someone, lo machar sabakar, that doesn't include the ox. Machar zabakar, lo machar samet, if you sell the ox, it doesn't include the yoke. Rabbi Amar hadamim modin, you can tell by the price. right? Okay, so that's what do I mean? Amar if he says, sell me your yoke for $200, right? Way over its value. Everybody knows that you don't pay $200 for a yoke, and therefore it must be the price implies that the oxen are included. No, the Chachamim say no. If you want to buy the oxen, you have to be explicit, right? The fact that you're overpaying for the yoke doesn't give you the right to the ox. Okay. Tani Rav Tachlifa Bar Marava Kamei Rav Yava. Rav Tachlifa taught Machar Sakaron Machar Saprados. Opposite from our Mishnah, if you sell the wagon, that includes the mules that are attached to it. Vanon la Machar Tanan. But what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says the opposite. Amalei. So he said Ismia. So should I suppress this brisa? Should I maybe the brisa I told you is wrong because it's against this Mishnah? Amalei, lo. He said no. Titargem masnitech badukinbo. You can explain the difference in the cases, as the Bryce says, where the donkeys are hitched up to the wagon at the time of the sale. Oh, then they could be included. But if they're not, if they're out grazing or they're whatever, they're not hitched up to the wagon, they're in their stall, then we go with our mission. That's what our mission is referring to where the donkeys are not included. Okay, so it's different than I explained in the Mishnah. The Gemara ends up by saying that if the donkeys are attached to the wagon, then Rav Tachlifa's brisa applies, and they are included in the sale. If they're not attached, then our mission applies, and they are not included in the sale. Okay, so machar that
How does one even have from the Mishnah? How does one even have the hava mina to think that the donkeys, the mules, are not attached? I mean, when I read the Mishnah, I'm thinking that they're already attached. A person going to ride it with the wagon.
Exactly, but then that contradicts this other brisa. So in order to to accept both the Mishnah and the Brisa, which seem to be saying the opposite things, we're rereading the Mishnah to say that's only if they are unattached that the sale does not include the donkeys. But if they are attached, then we go with the Brisa that says that the donkeys are included. If you sell the yoke, that doesn't include the ox. What's going on here? What's the case? Now we're getting into a question of nomenclature, right? If I say I'm selling you a yoke, does that, in the common parlance, does that mean a yoke with the oxen or not? So if it's a place where where they're referred to separately, a yoke means a yoke and oxen means oxen. Pshita tzim dazabin le bakar ladabin le. Then obviously, if I sell you a yoke, it's only the yoke, right? Because that's what the words mean. Where in common parlance. What about in the place where if you say a yoke, you mean the yoke plus the ox, right? Plus the oxen. Then kuli zaminle, then everybody would agree that that's what it means, right? That if a yoke means a yoke plus oxen, then it includes the oxen. Well, Srichas Gemara says no problem. Basra the kar le'lotzimda tzimda olavakar bakar. The economy the kar levakar tzimda is a place where it's not clear what it means. Some people will say a yoke and they mean only a yoke. Some people will say a yoke and they mean a yoke plus the oxen. Rabbi Yehuda Savar Adam Modin. So then Rabbi Yehuda says, well, let's look at the purchase price to determine what the guy meant when he said yoke. If he paid a very high price, then he must have meant with the oxen. And the rabbis say, no, you can't use the price as an indication. But if it's the case that you can't go by the price, they have a bitul mekach. Let's say it's like a case of overcharging. We should be able to void the sale altogether, right? So why do you even get the yoke if you're charging way too much, right? There's a rule on how much profit you can get from a sale. It's up to 1/6. So if you're paying double, or more, then the sale should be invalid. So what do you want to answer? Bitul mekach l'rabanan le'slahu, that the rabbis say, yeah, you can't overcharge, but that doesn't mean we can cancel the sale. It just means you're doing wrong. Below. but we know that the rabbis do say you can void the sale. V'atnan, we have a Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hamocher Sefer Torah behemo margalis. If you sell something very expensive like a Sefer Torah or an animal or a pearl, ein lehem ona. On these kinds of things, there's no limit in how much you can charge, right? Because they're rare or they're they have particular value to the buyer. There's no such thing as overcharging. You can charge as much as the buyer will pay. Amrlo, so the rabbi says, Lo Amru Elas Elu, but only these specific things listed in the Mishnah that we were referring to, um, which are avadim, land, and hekdesh. Only those things are not subject to ona, to the rule of overcharging. But the three things that you, Rabbi Yehuda, added on, the Sefer Torah, Behemo, Margalis, those things are subject to ona. Um, so so clearly the rabbis agree that there is such a thing as ona, and you can cancel the sale. So the question returns, like, how come if you're charging so much if you're charging way too much for the yoke, don't say the oxen are not included, say the whole sale is canceled. My inadami raya nami diktani. So indeed, the Gemara says, what does the money is not proof? What they mean is the have bitul mekach. You know why? It's not a proof because it's not even a sale. So implicit in what the Rabbanan are saying in the Mishnah, that the overpaying is not a way to determine if the oxen are included. Not only that, because it's not even a sale at all. Or or you could say, when do the rabbis say that you can cancel the sale because of overcharging? Where um, where the overcharging is like within reason, right? So the rule for overcharging is 1/6. So let's say, so what's that, like 15%? So let's say you overcharged by 20%. Okay, 20% is not like 100%. Um, but in when you charge double or triple, right, a ridiculous amount to overcharge, then doesn't apply. Amor matana. So because we're saying like nobody's gonna overpay that much. What's really going on here is that the seller wants to give money to the buyer. Sorry, the buyer wants to give money to the seller, right? But he doesn't want to just give it to him. Maybe it's a case of tzedakah, and you don't want to make the guy feel like he's a charity case. So instead, you pay him an exorbitant amount for something, right? You buy a dozen eggs for $15. No, that's not even exorbitant anymore. You buy a dozen eggs for $100. So really, obviously, you don't think the eggs are worth $100. If you're really overcharging that much, your intention is to give him a gift, and so then the transaction is valid because it's not really overcharging, right?
So it's not betel then because it's like a gift. It's whatever, for whatever reason,
Right.
he's
But
supporting
but
you.
the case of our Mishnah would be when you overcharge by a reasonable amount, right? Like by 20%, right? 30%. Right. So in that case, the rabbis would say, we don't necessarily know that you have some other motive in mind. Maybe you're really being overcharged, and so we should really cancel the transaction altogether. Okay. Okay, that's it for today.
Okay, very good.
Have a good day, everybody.
Have a good day.